Cool. Well, I'm really excited about this interview. I am with Dr. Jennifer Konzen.
You got
Yes,
it.
Konzen. She has been featured in Psychology Today. She wrote The Art of Intimate Marriage. I am here to talk to her about her book, Redeem Sexuality, the guide to sexuality for Christian singles, campus students, teens, and parents. With myself, I majored in psychology in school, so I've read a lot of books on sex and sexuality, but this is by far the best book I've read on the biblical perspective of sex and sexuality. Seems to be a big topic now, especially today, with identity crisis and whatnot. So Jennifer, I'm really excited to be able to talk to you today about your book, Redeem Sexuality. How are things in San Diego? Is the weather nice around this time of year, or?
It is absolutely drop dead gorgeous right now. Very blue skies, sunny. The leaves are blowing in a very light wind, and I can hear all the birds chirping out my window. So it's gorgeous here right now.
Well, everyone in Dallas, Texas envies that type of weather, but so I'll go ahead and dive into your book. I
Sure.
found the development of the sexual self, chapter 4. I found that a really interesting chapter. Mainly
Mm.
maybe it's just because of just what I'm interested in. The part where it talks about the cultural experiences of shame and sexuality. I'm curious, as you talk about this topic and subject to various groups of people, do you find that there's certain types of cultures and groups of people that are uncomfortable with the topic of sex and sexuality, or is this something that everybody's uncomfortable with?
It's funny because people tend to think that certain cultures are more uncomfortable.
Mhm.
And it's interesting because maybe as a national culture, certain cultures talk about it more. So that would mean like in the public view, there's more open laws. But let me tell you, I have definitely found that kind of across cultures, there's an overall discomfort. When I was in Singapore, I was amazed by how open the brothers and sisters there were to getting help in this area, and how the moment they had time with me, they're pouring out vivid details and wanting help. And then I was in Sweden, and this is a much more open about sexuality country, but because they don't actually talk about it necessarily openly and honestly in their families, it was still a major taboo. So the things, basically, it was a taboo in both countries, in each country, in each state, um, mostly because families don't talk about it openly. So even if it's an open discussion at a larger cultural level, like movies and TV and uh, podcasts and legally and governmentally, maybe it's an open laws and things like that, but within family cultures, and especially religious cultures, it is not often an open conversation. And so the taboo piece is there.
So how do you create an environment, or how do you change that? I mean, is your desire to change that cultural part, or how do you create an environment to where people feel more comfortable talking about sex and sexuality?
Well, the desire to change it would be really connected with, is it a good idea? Is it helpful? And we do know, literally, I'm a researcher. From research, we know that the not talking about sexuality is problematic to the development of sexuality. It's problematic to committed marital sexuality. So lack of lack of open, honest, genuine, direct communication about sexuality has an impact on the development of sexuality. So in families that don't talk, they don't have like the birds and the bees talk, or don't talk about puberty and the changes that happen to the body, or that don't talk about arousal and what that's like and what do you do with it. Families that haven't managed to do that, what happens is then the children growing up in that environment get this idea that sex is taboo, it's secret, you don't talk about it. Well, then that continues through their relationships, their adulthood, not in every situation, but in many situations. And so the idea of sex being taboo is kind of across the board, even across gender. Specifically, though, for certain individuals, and probably more so for the female gender, it's also associated with, because it's not talked about, it feels dirty. It's taboo, therefore it's wrong. It's taboo. For males, it's a little bit more along the lines of masturbation and pornography. We don't talk about it. It's taboo to talk about it, and so it creates problems. So the problems might be different per gender, per background, but the lack of talking about it is associated very strongly in research, and then, of course, in my experience, just working with people with problematic sexuality.
What are your thoughts?
Yes, I guess the answer to that would be, do I think we should help start with the families? Well, the families and the churches, because that's mostly, I'm a marriage and family therapist, and I work within the Christian community. And so, yes, is it my goal to help churches and families talk more openly about sexuality? Yes, because we do know that just the talking openly about it has a big impact on sexual behaviors and choices with anything like sexual addiction and so on. But with marital sexuality, it has a huge impact on the ability for a marital couple to have a mutually enjoyable sexual relationship.
So that was my follow-up question, is what your thoughts on how Christianity in general is about talking about this sex and sexuality within a church setting. I mean, I've read research where it's very taboo to talk about it, because the myth is, and I don't know, maybe correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems to be this idea of, if we don't say anything, then we won't give them any ideas.
That actually is, I've literally had parents tell me that, that, you know, the reason why, or I've had my own students in my courses ask their parents, because they do this, they do a sexual genogram in my courses, and they look at generations of sexual practices and the impact that it has. And one of the questions they ask their parents is, how come you didn't have that talk with me? Well, because I was afraid you would go have sex. So this is actually pretty common in churches and in families. We don't want to talk about it because then it might give them an idea to go and do something. And so the fear is a pretty big driver of why some people don't talk openly in their families, why some parents don't talk with their kids, because they're fearful of their child getting involved sexually. In churches, what you'll find is that in singles, campus, teens groups, the communication is, in general, which is kind of like families. In general, it's don't do this. It's the don'ts. Don't get pregnant. Don't have sex. Don't touch. Don't watch this. Which actually, the majority of the Bible is full of the don'ts. The percentage of scriptures spiritually are what not to do sexually. However, what the Bible is full of is all the beautiful things about sexuality and what it is supposed to be. And then, so churches and families don't have that part of the conversation. So what sex is supposed to be in God's plan for sexuality is often not talked about. It's the part that's talked about is pretty much just the don'ts.
And do you feel like part of the reason why maybe some church leaders don't feel comfortable talking about sex and sexuality is because they don't feel equipped to talk about it? Is it a training issue?
Well, in churches, most of the time, the only time sex is talked about is in regards to sin. So like, don't look at pornography and don't have sex. So it's talked about, I'll just say it really bluntly. When I
Go ahead, say it.
When I get asked to speak at a conference, you'll notice, okay, so I'm going to get myself in trouble here. If you look at the conferences, they'll have tracks, even our own family of churches, they'll have tracks for sexuality, and it's a purity tract and a track on same-sex attraction. Mm-hmm. So we'll have tracks on how not to have sex in those ways. I actually proposed, I don't want anybody to listen to this, okay? I actually proposed a track on sexuality That didn't happen because I actually think we need to model that we don't just talk about sex when it has to do with sin, that we can talk about healthy sexuality. We should be talking to our singles, campus, and teens about arousal and how that happens and what do you do with it. So we should be talking, because singles and campus and teens all have questions about how sex works and what happens in marriage. But people are afraid that they're going to go out and do something, so they don't answer those questions. And it's actually pretty vital to open up those conversations so that people can make strong spiritual and healthy decisions about their sexual lives. So yeah, there we go.
I want to transition into chapter 5.
Yeah.
I was really surprised about chapter 5 about body image, because it's something that I never really, it's an issue that's out there, but I never connected it with the Bible, of how often the Bible talks about body image. You use the example in Luke chapter 2 verse 52 of how Jesus grew in wisdom and stature. Proverbs chapter 31 verse 17, a wife of noble character, worked and had strong arms. What inspired you to put in a chapter about body image?
It's funny because I'm a sex therapist. I'm a chemical dependency, certified chemical dependency counselor, and I specialize in eating disorders. Why?
Oh, wow.
How? Because those overlap so much. So issues with sexuality and issues actually with drugs and issues with body overlap constantly in the work that I do. And we actually know from research that body image and concerns with the body have a big impact on people's engagement in sexuality. You'll have people that will engage in sex because it makes them think that person must find me attractive. They must find my body attractive. If they want to have sex with me, it means I'm attractive. You'll have people that do engage in sex, and when their partner touches them and they are insecure about their body, it makes it hard for them to enjoy sex or to be relaxed during sex. So people will engage or not engage, and then how they engage sexually is heavily influenced by how they feel about their body, how people have talked about their body, how other people talk about their body. And so often there's a relearning about what does the Bible say about the body, and how should we view our own bodies, and do we have God's view of the body when we look at our own bodies and when we look at each other's bodies.
How have you seen social media influence body image, especially with Facebook, Instagram, TikTok,
Yeah.
Snapchat? I mean, people are putting their bodies out there to either like or dislike or comments. Have you seen, I don't know if there's been any research that has shown the correlation between our view of body image and the role of social media and the internet?
Lots and lots. That's actually one that's gotten some really good research. We know that how people perceive what is called the idealized body. The idealized body is, I mean, we're doing a little bit better. You know, if you go in Target, you'll see some of the clothes displayed on a mannequin where the mannequin is not just this thin pole. Some of the mannequins are actually larger. You'll see it in some of the magazines that are out there, but predominantly it's a huge thing, and it is not just a female thing, it's male and female, where this is what the ideal body should look like. So it causes issues with concern about weight. It causes issues with facial appearance and issues with hair and muscularity. So masculinity and muscularity, the size and look of muscles. And this is across cultures. And it is not just female, it is male and female. That I do quite a bit of work when I'm doing work on sexuality. I do quite a bit of, I actually sit with my clients and we look at videos together and we talk about how media, whether it's magazines or whether it's TikTok, social media, or whether it's movies. Movies, when you actually even see sexuality in movies, most of the time people are thin and good looking. So we don't put what is not the idealized body even into sexual scenes. But then also media affects how people feel about their nose, their hair, their weight, their sexual bodies. Pornography has a huge impact on what the body should look like as well. So, yeah.
And what's some direction? Because I'm sure there's church leaders watching this going, okay, well, how do I talk about body image without having a bias or having a misunderstanding of what I'm trying to convey? Because we want people to be healthy, but being healthy and being, I don't know what your thoughts on that are.
Yeah, no, the Bible actually talks a bit about health, and that's a good thing to shoot for. I, as an eating disorder specialist, I use a model called Health at Every Size, which how to be healthy no matter what your size is, which would actually match pretty well with the scriptures. So instead of us thinking only someone who's thin is healthy, I don't know if you've seen those advertisements for it's a medication that people can take for various issues, and it's two people who are really thin, and they're both walking through a gym, and one hits a window, doesn't see the window, and hits the window and falls over, and they're twins, and they're both thin, and they're both looking in shape, and the commercial is making this point of what someone looks like doesn't necessarily mean they might not be having cholesterol problems. And so we tend to think cholesterol problems would only be if, and so this commercial is making this point of these two identical people, one runs into a clear window and falls over, and that we tend to associate health with thinness, when actually health can be at many different sizes. And so, yes, should people shoot for health? Yes. Should they shoot for thinness? That's a good question. And so even as a church, sometimes we can be influenced by the messages from the world that thinness equals health, when actually shooting for health is a really good idea, and shooting for strength and vigor. So those are the words that are used in Psalm 31, Proverbs 31, and then also it calls Jesus strong. So should perhaps people shoot for being strong and eating in a self-controlled manner? Should they, nutritionally, should they shoot for that rather than shooting for the ideal body image? I think if we shoot for strength and vigor and for nutritious eating, David talks about how, it's in Psalms where it says, don't eat, or Proverbs, sorry, I'm not even quoting it right. Don't eat too much honey because it'll make you sick. So, okay, so it's probably a good idea to make sure we're not overeating any particular product, because it probably will have a negative impact on your body. So should we have some self-control, about what we put in our bodies? Absolutely. Should we shoot for health? Absolutely. The problem is when the goal is the idealized body image, it's problematic.
And how do parents talk to their teenagers about this?
Oh, yes, they should talk to their teenagers about it. Actually, if you want to help a parent talk, do you mean about sexuality or body image?
Body image.
So if you want to start with a parent talking well, they first have to check their own stuff. Parents have a lot of issues around the body and weight and their own views, that if they want to have a good conversation with their teenager, they should probably do their own work around their own views and beliefs. I think a theology of sexuality is undergirded by a good theology of the body. Mm-hmm. Do we have a good theology of the body? I had an individual who was a part of a research study that I did, and her family, her dad would put her obese sister on a scale in front of the whole family.
Oh.
Yeah. So he's trying to get a message across, right? How did you do that? He did it with humiliation. And the thing is that the woman who was in my research study, she was the sister watching this and ended up dealing with decades of anorexia. So how families talk about the body will have a huge impact. So first, the parent needs to check themselves. You'll have moms. I do a whole workshop on body image for it's a God, Women, and Sexuality. God, Women, and Body Image. And the issue with body image is that if moms are constantly talking about their dieting practices, it influences a negative view of the body that the young female or even the young male will have. And so a dad that says, hey, I think you need to, stop eating that much. So how people talk to their children about how much food they're intaking and about the shape of their body, you're looking a little skinny there, or you're looking like you're putting on a little bit there. So those kinds of comments are really problematic to the developing person. And so I think the main thing being parents first need to figure out their own biases and their own views and gain God's view of the body. God is really body positive. If you look at the scriptures, he says you are fearfully and wonderfully made. We tend to use the scripture about that we are a temple as you know what? You're a temple and you're using your body wrong. How about we go, you're a temple. Isn't that amazing? You're fearfully and wonderfully made. Isn't that amazing? Now let's go use our bodies as if they're temples, as if they're fearfully and wonderfully made. So instead of using shaming techniques, using the techniques that God uses, which is very body positive. Let's go get some movement. Let's go, instead of saying things negatively in order to create change.
So when, let's just say you have parents that are trying to lose weight, they're on a diet, is that conversation between the two parents of, hey, I'm trying to lose weight, I want to get on a diet, and they're constantly talking about that, would that have a negative effect on a child that overhears those conversations, or is it just within the context of how they communicate the diet that parent is on?
So there's a couple different things. Parents that pursue dieting practices, that do surgeries, that talk about weight a lot, it impacts the developing child's view of their own body and of other people's bodies. So should they do that? I think that's a really valid question. It's actually at the end of my presentation when I'm presenting to moms and daughters, that moms, if you're actually talking about your dieting practices in front of your child, you're communicating something. And so you want to talk about that. You want to really examine do you want to communicate whatever you're communicating in doing that? Is that what you want to communicate to your child? So I do think people need to examine that. This is just a bigger question, what to do with the dieting cultures. So one of the things that I point out to people is we engage in what you call fat talk. So this is people sit around a table at a party and they're, I'm not going to eat this, or I can eat this because I worked out yesterday, or, it's got 0 calories because I'm eating it with my fingers instead of a fork, or, hey, this is my workout that I've been doing, so and this happens in families, but it also happens in our church culture, where we cannot sit around and have a party and just enjoy food, which the Bible talks about actually enjoying food, that we have a difficulty doing that. We have to talk, it's called fat talk in the field of eating disorders and disordered eating. One of the things you talk about is just starting to recognize what you call fat talk, which is how we have to constantly talk about dieting when we're enjoying something that we're eating, and what would it be like to change those behaviors, because those behaviors are actually problematic to how people view their own bodies, and it's actually problematic to their eating behaviors, because then it causes people to hide what they're eating and to feel ashamed of what they're eating, and so on.
A lot to think about.
Yeah.
I know and I'm sure my brain's going 1,000 miles an hour just with all the questions I could ask, but I want to transition to chapter 6 of sexual abuse. Not exactly the most fun topic to talk about, but it is a topic that I feel like a lot of people are curious about. The section where you talk about the crisis of faith, tied into sexual abuse. How do you help somebody with their view of God and their view of themselves whenever they had to experience sexual abuse in their own life. And I ask this question because I want to be able to help people heal. And I'm just curious about just the crisis of faith, and maybe, I don't know, have you had any experiences with people that have healed with their view of God when they have undergone sexual abuse in their life?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, it's not uncommon where someone experiences some kind of sexual violation and it causes them not to pursue God because of various factors involved with how they view God, how they view the person, and that's connected to how they view God. Or, and this has happened a lot too, where I'll have women, especially, I've also worked with men, but I'll share with you about a couple of women who they come in and they've become disciples, and then they had an assault or a rape that happened when they were younger. So they were either assaulted as a young child or as a teenager, or it even happened as an adult. And here they are as a disciple, and they feel guilty. They feel bad for questioning God. Where were you? Some people, their questions are more overt, where they're angry at God. They feel God wasn't there. And why didn't God protect them? Or sometimes people will feel that anger, but they feel bad about feeling that anger. And so there is, well, number one, when people are expressing their anger to God, I think the thing that the person listening has to do is validate that response. I mean, to go, but God didn't do it, or God was listening, or you shouldn't, like, to do any kind of an invalidating response, like you shouldn't feel that way, not super helpful, because the reality is, I think God is understanding. David says over and over, why, God? And over, and he's, why weren't you here? And why do the wicked prosper? And so I think God he let those parts of this of what David wrote stay in the Bible. I think God's pretty patient with our crises of faith. I think he's compassionate about our crises of faith. And so I think in general, there's often a relearning about God and who he is that sometimes has to occur. I don't always know the answer to why God didn't stop some horrendous. I mean, the stories that people tell me are so hard to hear. And even as the person hearing them, I'm like, oh, God, why didn't you intervene? That young child didn't do anything to put themselves in that circumstance. And so I think that's where the crisis comes in. And so sometimes we might not know why. I actually did my own study of why, when God intervenes, and that sometimes he doesn't. And sometimes the intervening is we get to go to heaven. It doesn't happen in our lifetime. He doesn't stop some awful thing from happening. So I had to do my own study of that. But that study of when he intervenes and when he doesn't was really in a bigger context. It was in the context of who God is. I think that's where the spiritual learning comes in, is really looking at God's character. Like even today, actually in my quiet time this morning, I was reading through Mark, and it stood out to me, these different scriptures on Jesus and emotion. And I then went through all of the different parts of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John where it shares about Jesus's emotion. Well, do we know that about God? Do we know his heart, his emotion, his character? I think that's the biggest healing, is knowing who he is, and that he grieves when we grieve. He has compassion. He aches. It says he keeps that he holds our tears in a bottle. So our tears are important to him. Like that song, I felt every teardrop he felt every teardrop when in darkness we cried. So he hears our tears. He feels our pain. And I think it's important that we understand his character in order to get to a point of healing when someone has wronged us in a really terrible, eviscerating way. So.
And for people that are angry at God, is that an emotion that you encourage them to express and to have for them to be able to get to a place of healing?
I think God allows people to feel and express that. It's literally in the scriptures. You see David's anger towards God. I think God wants us to bring everything to him, including our pain and our anger. It's amazing how David expresses it. And most of the time where he expresses it, he gets to this point of where he gets back to who God is by the end of that. Most of the sections where he's pouring out his anger, you see him get to this remembrance of who God is. But you see his process, and you see God's willingness to hear David's anger. I think what we know about anger, we can be so afraid of anger, but what the scriptures actually say is in your anger, not to sin. It doesn't say that the anger in and of itself is a sin. I think God wants us to bring all of our emotions to him.
Yeah. And I'm curious of how sexual abuse can tie into body image, and the development of the sexual self. What are your thoughts on that? How does it tie into body image and the development of the sexual self?
Well, sexual abuse, one of the challenges that happens with sexual abuse, I was just with a client today actually talking about this exact thing. The person who's being abused, their body is being treated in a way that they have no control over what this person's doing to my body. It really impacts the idea that my body is mine to decide what to do with. You'll see this big time right now in the Me Too movement. So again, this is mostly about women, but it's absolutely with men. I work with men and women who have been abused and violated and touched in various different ways. And when that happens, it creates I don't have rights over my own body. Sometimes people can end up becoming sexually promiscuous when they've experienced sexual abuse, and other times they become sexually avoidant, where they're afraid of sexuality. And so both promiscuous sexuality, so what you call risky sexuality, that's going to impact people's sexual lives, even in a healthy relationship, in a marital relationship. But then fear of sexuality and sexual avoidance and can affect sexuality in a healthy marital relationship. But also whether people are married or not, through their developmental years, people will often experience what you call a long-term symptoms of PTSD. So this would be startle reflexes, nightmares, flashbacks. I've had at my conferences for singles and campus and teens, they tell me, I had a young woman say she kept having these bizarre flashes of, she'd never engaged sexually. She'd been assaulted as a teenager multiple times over a year by boys at her school. And she, as an adult, a disciple, faithful, kept having all of these bizarre sexual flashes of thoughts. She had never had somebody explain to her that that's actually one of the results of sexual trauma. Either they'll get flashbacks about what happened to them, or they'll have random sexual thoughts that seem to come from nowhere. Or I've had individuals who were assaulted in childhood where they couldn't see the person would come into their bed. And so anytime that their spouse would touch their shoulder where they couldn't see them coming, and the spouse, they would have this immediate curl into a ball, traumatic. So that's a PTSD response. I've had individuals where someone has come up without being able to see them, and they've thrown their arms around them, and they didn't see them coming, and they had a panic attack. So you'll have those kinds of ongoing issues, whether people are in committed marital relationships or not. They'll experience them through the years, or they experience nothing. They don't ever feel like they have those flashbacks or dreams. But then once they're married, it'll sometimes come up right at a honeymoon, but actually most of the time it comes up several years into a healthy, strong marriage where they're in a safe place with a safe relationship, and then it will come up. So all of those symptoms will start appearing later in life. As far as body image, gosh, everything having to do with sexual abuse affects how people view their bodies. So that would be how it affects sexuality, body image, negative view of the body. People have negative views of their body most commonly, or they are promiscuous with their body, all attached to a sexual abuse background. So both directions.
Well, sorry, it's a lot to process just with everything that
It
you're
is, and if
sharing
I
and
can
whatnot.
say this, you might want to, even as you post this, and I always tell people when I'm getting ready to come into these sections on sexual abuse and trauma, so you might want to put this as you're putting it out there, and you can keep this in here because I think it's important, is that sometimes when people hear lessons like this, it brings up problems. They just by listening to me do a lesson, their heart rate will pick up. They'll start to have flashes in their mind, and they might have trouble that day or that week emotionally. So it is important that if people are having responses that become problematic, they might need to get some support, because it's hard to talk about this, and it's hard, especially if someone's experienced it and they're listening.
Yeah, it's very, it sounds like a very challenging situation to be in.
Yeah.
COVID-19, shelter in place, quarantine.
Yeah.
Let's talk about pornography and masturbation. Pornography is on, sky high. I mean, my goodness. I mean, it's pretty scary, the numbers. I want to ask, I am curious about something. What is your definition of pornography? Because it seems like the definition of what pornography is seems to have changed since social media and the internet. Some people consider, if you're scrolling through social media and you see a woman in a bikini, oh, that's not pornography. Pornography is something that you actually have to go to an actual porn site. Is a sex scene in a movie pornography? Is it not? Have you developed kind of your own definition of what pornography, like the definition of pornography is?
Well, pornography would be any exploitation of sexuality on some kind of media. So that's putting nakedness or sexual scenes or sexual scenarios with something, somebody, something on some kind of media. However, sometimes for people, for a good chunk of people, when they look at someone in a bikini or they look at a sex scene in a TV show, most of those are pornographic because they're naked and they're having sex, even if you're not seeing the breast or the penis. So often you'll see shows that remove the genitals, and so then it's not pornography because the genitals are not being shown. However, for most people, when they look at a bikini or even something that is a romantic sexual scene, they have a sexual response. So although it might not be pornography, it causes them to struggle with their thoughts, with lustful thoughts, or with the desire to masturbate or to go look at something pornographic. And so although the medium might not be under the definition of pornography, it does create problematic sexual responses that they then end up doing problematic sexual behaviors.
And is there I'm sure there is a difference, but how would you identify someone who has a pornography addiction versus someone who just occasionally looks at porn whenever they're stressed? Is there a definition of what makes someone an addict?
You just must have had a camera in my sessions today, because that was also in my session today. I actually did some education around what is addiction. So Addiction, in the previous DSM, so the Diagnostic Manual here in the United States, previous to 2013, they had a dependence and use. So if you were dependent on a drug or alcohol, you were an addict, and meaning that you had a physiological dependence on the substance. So in 2013, the DSM, the newest edition came out, and they said this was not helpful, and they got rid of the you're an addict. Well, they actually didn't call it addiction. They called it dependence, alcohol use, or alcohol abuse, or alcohol dependence. And they did that with all the drugs. This drug use, abuse, or this drug dependence. And dependence was the word that was used for this person's addicted in the common nomenclature outside of, say, psychological fields. And so what they did with the 2013 edition was they got rid of the abuse and dependence, and they just said use. So they put it on a spectrum of mild, medium, moderate, and severe, because somebody that, like with alcohol, if they're just drinking once a month, but in that once a month, they're not drinking every day, they're not getting drunk every day, they're not having the shakes in the morning, but that once a month drinking, they drink to excess and black out and do things that are, sexually dangerous or driving. That person's got an alcohol problem. So would you say that's not an addict because they're not doing it every day and they're not shaking in the morning and drinking to get rid of the shakes? So it's the same view of when they started looking at what you call behavioral addictions. So a behavioral addiction is not a drug or alcohol. It is, so that would be gambling, food, which actually is a substance, shopping, internet gaming. So they thought about putting sexual addiction into the DSM. They actually had it on the possible category, and they didn't include it because they said it didn't have enough research. And so they did include gambling because they had more research on gambling. So gambling is actually considered, it's in the DSM as a disorder. So that's the word that's used in our American nomenclature is disorder, a gambling disorder, an alcohol use disorder. In the international guide of diseases, they actually call it compulsive sexuality, and they do include it. It's included under impulse control, that you have an impulse, you don't control it well, and so then you engage in hypersexual behaviors. So compulsive, I can't stop. The main thing about what would be considered, and so in the field, they call it sexual addiction. So it's not in our diagnostic manual in the United States. And it's actually barely in the diagnostic manual internationally. But in the field of addictive care, it's absolutely included. They have assessments. So you can do an assessment to see if you have a sex addiction. The main thing about problematic use is that if it's causing you a problem, if it's causing someone else a problem, if you've tried to stop and you keep doing it. So this can be somebody that uses once a month. They go on pornography once a month and they keep trying not to do it and they keep coming back to it, and that's been 10 years. That would be, there's a problem. They've tried to stop, they've tried a bunch of different things and they can't. So it doesn't really matter if they do it every day, 3 times a day, or if they do it once a month. It has to do with, I've tried to stop and I keep coming back to it. The other thing that is they pay attention to is why people use. So if people use because they're stressed, sad, angry, bored, so they use it for emotional regulation. They're using it to deal with their emotional state. So people will eat because they're stressed. People will go gambling because they're sad and it makes them happy. People will do pornography because it creates excitement and it gives them a release. So they'll use it because that lowers their anxiety. One of the biggest reasons that people pursue addictive use of any substance, as well as sexuality or any other kinds of behaviors is because they're using it to lower their anxiety. It's one of the biggest reasons that people do, and they don't recognize it because it started off as a habit. They kind of found it when they were 10, then they started viewing it all the time as a teenager and a young adult, and then they got in a habit of use. So it starts off sometimes differently, but then they start using it. When they get that negative phone call, their finger hits that button. I mean, there's this, I'm stressed, I'm upset, and this relieves my anxiety, so I go do it.
So when you work with clients that have a pornography addiction, do you give them tools to help them with their stress and anxiety, and the outcome of that would be less pornography use? Or how do you help your clients through that?
Very good question. I do a few things. So you do have to find out, is it depression? Then you'd need to help with their depression. So that's dealing with what you call the underlying factors. What's underneath the use? However, anytime someone uses a substance or a behavior that's become problematic, where they're compulsively using it and it's causing problems in their life and they're trying to stop and they can't, it's usually a good idea to also put certain things into place to help them with the compulsive use, because your brain gets really used to, when you're stressed, you go towards this to deal with the stress. So your brain has created these pathways, is what we're kind of understanding it as, that the brain creates these pathways. And so there's this automatic path you walk along. And so there is a certain amount, like when people go to say a rehab, they detox them, because you do have to be away from the substance for your body and your brain to relearn how to live. I worked with a woman who'd been drinking to the point of drunkenness once a month, to the point of blackout, for about 15 years. And she actually she decided not to drink anymore to figure out whether she should ever drink again. And she was about 3 to 4 months out of not drinking before she started to realize all the ways that the drinking had influenced the way she thought about life, how she viewed parties, how she viewed going and visiting other cities, how she viewed her partner. So it had colored her thinking. So people have to detox from whatever it is. They have to do a certain level of cut it off. So Jesus said, if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off. There has to be a certain level of cut it off in order for the brain to create those new pathways. But then you also have to deal with the underlying behavior, because if the person is using that behavior because of depression and you don't treat the depression, the likelihood of them going back to that behavior or some other addiction is high. So it's not really a one or the other, it's more of a both.
And I'm guessing it's common for people to just change to another addiction. That's more...
Very common. Mm-hmm. Very common. So like if you go to an AA meeting, so an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting, one of the 12-step meetings, just go see what they're doing on their breaks. They're smoking and eating donuts. So, we're on caffeine and sugar. So yeah, people will, instead of dealing with the fact that they're using a substance to manage their emotion, they're still using a substance. It might just be a somewhat less dangerous one because of various factors. But so that's where ongoing mental health care and seeing a therapist can be really helpful. Being a disciple, following Jesus, reading your Bible, having lots of support, having disciples in your life who love you. Having those pieces in your life are vital to the process of overcoming those challenges.
And what's the correlation between, I'm guessing there's a correlation between emotional maturity and pornography use, because if you're using, because you mentioned emotions a couple of times, if someone's constantly going to pornography and masturbation to regulate their emotions, I'm guessing that the emotional maturity is kind of, the growth is kind of stunned at some point.
So it can be, if you've got a 10-year-old who's abused at that age, it's going to affect their sexual development. If you've got a 10-year-old whose parents divorced at that age, it's going to affect their emotion and relational development. If you've got a 10-year-old, so stuff that happens in childhood can do the stunting of development. And so that often happens when a child who's like 2, 3, 4 years old, they fall down, they scrape their knee, they cry for help. And in a safe, secure environment, mom, dad come and bandage up their knee and send them on their way. And they feel safe and secure that they can now go continue exploring. But if that child is 2, 3, 4 years old, they fall, scrape their knee, and no one's there. They look around and there's nobody to be safe, nobody to help them. And so it creates an anxiety in that child, or they receive, why are you crying? What are you crying about? Some kind of unsafe, pushing away response. So that then creates what you call an insecure attachment, where there's an anxiousness, always looking, are you there for me? Are you there for me? Is somebody there for me? Are you going to be there for me? That fear of abandonment, to, well, you're not there for me, so, oh well, I'll just take care of it on my own. So it can create two different areas that I work with people on, is what you call an anxious attachment or an avoidant attachment. Often people are a mixture of those two. When they didn't have safe emotional development when they were young, where they could express their emotion openly and someone would put the Band-Aid on, like help them with it, like help them talk through it, someone who was safe to talk to. If they didn't have that environment, then those skills don't develop, and that emotion management skill didn't happen in this safe, secure environment. And so those skills of what you would call intimacy skills and emotion management skills don't get to grow. Now, what's really lovely is that people can develop those skills. If they didn't have it when they were younger, they can develop it in safe emotional relationships. And this is where discipling is the most wonderful thing under heaven. And godly marriages can be amazing, where now in these safe sister to sister, brother to brother, boyfriend to girlfriend, husband to wife, parent to child in a godly family can now experience emotional environments where they can safely say, this is how I feel, and they receive empathy and validation and help and support and direction, and that it's okay. Most of the time people say that their parents didn't express things emotionally. They didn't feel like, I asked people questions like, when you were young and you had a tough day, sad day, something difficult happened, who did you talk to? And often people say, I say, who did you talk to, if anybody? And often what I receive is, there wasn't anybody to talk to. Our family didn't talk about emotion. And so that does it call it emotional maturity? The term that's a little bit more used is emotional IQ. So this is,
Okay.
Emotional intelligence, that doesn't get a chance to develop. I call it emotion management, that they don't learn the skills to manage and express emotion.
And how does someone become an emotionally safe person to other people?
You know what? I really made a mistake when I wrote Redeemed Sexuality. There are 3 chapters in the Art of Intimate Marriage that I did not include in Redeemed Sexuality. And when I do the 2nd edition, I am including those 3 chapters. And those 3 chapters are on speaking and listening, and the vital need of emotional connection in relationships. Bad me, that I did not include that in that book. So the development of intimacy skills and then the experience of those in relationships really has to do with the ability to share without attacking, to share directly, honestly, and openly, but then the person listening, that their goal is understanding, empathy. You think about Jesus sees a funeral go by of a widow. Her son has died, and it says his heart went out to her.
3 chapters you wanted to include listening, speaking, empathy. I believe you were talking about empathy.
Yeah. So one of the biggest things that people need when they do, it's very risky to share what you're feeling. It's dangerous because then the person might not have they might have a dismissive response or a response, or they might go, well, they might get defensive. So when someone does share, it's important that the listener provide an environment where it's safe. And a lot of that is just listening. And I teach people how to reflect, how to say, oh, so when you got that email, you felt, like, to just tell people what you're hearing and then to draw them out. I love Proverbs 20, verse 5, that says, the purposes of a man's heart are deep waters, and a man of understanding draws them out. So the goal is to be a person of understanding. So the actual Jesus story I was telling is, Jesus is at a funeral, or he sees a funeral go by, a widow with her son that's just died. And it literally says in the Greek, well, it says in our NIV, that his heart went out to her. What that actually means in the Greek is that his guts were moved. It's splagnochmai. It's a term that means his innards were moved. So when Jesus saw what this woman was going through, his whole body went, oh. So we have it literally shown in him what it means to have empathy and compassion, and that is actually what people need. When I share with you, when you share with me, we both hunger for understanding and empathy. And so sometimes people didn't get to experience that growing up, and they kind of have to learn it as an adult and in a safe relationship.
For the parent that's listening or watching, at what age should a parent talk to their kids about sex, pornography, masturbation? How do they talk to their kids about it? Because if they don't, the public school system's waiting for them.
So I was in Denver at the Youth and Family Conference, and I was teaching on how to teach your kids about sex, which anybody listening, I have a whole podcast on how to teach your kids about sex. You can go to my website, The Art of Intimate Marriage, and it's got a whole lesson. So I did that lesson in Denver, and I was talking to parents about how children have questions super early on, and then the moment they hit they go out of kindergarten into the first grade playground, they're hearing all kinds of things. So you want to have these talks, at those early stages. And then I looked out at the audience, and you could see all these kind of glassed looks from all of these parents. And I said, hey, how old are your kids? 0, da, da, da. Most of the audience had teenage kids and had not yet, or like preteens, 12, 10, and had not yet had this conversation. And I had just said first grade. And I was like, you could still have the conversation. But yes, in general, so there's a series of books called God's Design for Sex, and they actually started between like 2 and 5, where you explain body parts, that God made our body, and this is a girl's body with the vagina, and this is a boy's body with a penis. So this is how our bodies are made by God, and aren't they amazing? So you do that when they're little, because let me tell you, at 2 and 3, they're so curious about their bodies. They're looking at everybody else's bodies, and then they're watching other people pee, and they're in the shower, and they're just fascinated by body parts. So it's great to, right at that age when they're curious, teach them about God's amazing work in making the human body. And then, because children at about after that, at about 5, 6, 7, their interest in the body goes underground. They become socially aware that there are certain things you're not supposed to talk about. So they're still curious, but they're no longer verbalizing it often quite so openly. But they are very curious and still wondering and asking things in their minds. And then they come onto that first grade playground, and they're hearing words, and they don't know what the words mean. And the thing I tell parents is, where else do you want them to learn what these terms mean? What they're hearing sexual terms, because there's older kids on the playground and so on. They're wondering sexual thoughts by that age. And so who else would you rather them learn it from than for you? So by that 7-ish age, again, the book's God's Design for Sex, I think it's like between 6 and 9, where you do the how babies are made, the penis and the vagina, the sperm, egg, baby. And so explaining how sex happens and how babies are made by those early years. And most children are very responsive during that time. And so that is generally where I tell them to have the talk. But then the thing is that I tell parents they should be openly talking about sexuality from there on. Not that they just have a talk, but that your kids are hearing things, they're seeing things, they're listening to music, they're hearing jokes. So as they mature, and then as their bodies change and they're having nighttime emissions and they're growing pubic hair and their breasts are changing and their testicles are dropping. And so like having conversations about the changing body and about arousal as they come through puberty. So continuing to have those talks through puberty. And then definitely all kinds of more questions happen in the teenage years. A lot of teenagers are like, I don't want to talk to my parents about sex. And so I tell parents, give them the book, Redeem Sexuality, because in there is the longest chapter is on questions that teens have. And then another chapter in there is what's a teen to do? And it's actually written by individuals who are just out of the teen years. So campus students and young adults, what it was like for them in the teen years at school, at home, and at church. And it tells their stories. And so you can use those kinds of things to just say, so here, let's read this together. Was this your experience in school? Is this your experience in school? And so parents should be able to talk really from preschool years all the way through all the years that that kid is in their home.
What's the most common question that you get from parents?
About sexuality? Actually, probably the most common one is, how do I talk to my kids about sex? And then I would say the second most common is, how do I help them not engage in pornography? That's by far the two biggest ones. The third one being the overall, not just pornography, but sexuality. How do I help my child have a healthy sexuality, so that they make good sexual choices? So I'd say along those lines. And then, of course, if their child ever has been harmed in any way sexually, that's another one that brings parents to they call me if their child's been molested in some way. Yeah.
You wrote the book, The Art of Intimate Marriage. I'm in a singles ministry here in Dallas, Texas. What are some advice, thoughts you could give to the singles ministry? Because there are single disciples that do desire to get married one day. What are some things that they could do now to prepare for marriage? What are some skills that they should be developing? I know you mentioned being an emotionally safe person. Is there any other thoughts?
Well, actually, that question is why we wrote Redeemed Sexuality, because I have 4 kids myself. And at the time I wrote The Art of Intimate Marriage, they were teenagers, college students, and young adults. So their friends were over it all the time, and they saw the book and they were like, what about us? Can't you write a book for us? And so I was like, what a good idea. And out of that request came Redeem Sexuality, because yes, singles are actually asking. I love one of the workshops I went to, someone asked, so I haven't been engaging sexually. I did before, I haven't now, but I'm worried since I've shut it off so long, will it just turn back on when I get married? So singles are often have a lot of questions, and this is one of the challenges of the married ministries, is that the married ministries don't talk to the singles about it. In fact, if a single walks in the room and the marrieds were having some chat about sexuality, they go, shh, shh, shh. And the singles are like, what the heck? I'd like to have this conversation. So a good chunk of the time you have singles that are wishing somebody would talk openly, and they have questions. How is it? What's going on? I get asked, so is oral sex okay when people are married? I'm like, let's talk about that. And so we tend to think that we can't have those conversations when people are single, and yet that is exactly the conversations that need to happen. So I would say, first of all, start talking about it. I've actually had some lovely things happen with the art of intimate, with redeemed sexuality, is that there are groups in Boston, LA, and elsewhere, well, here in San Diego and elsewhere, that are having book clubs with the redeemed sexuality book, both some in separate groups, men groups, women's groups, but some in actually co-ed groups, which I think is awesome, where they're using the book to have open and honest conversations around sexuality. Why is that important? Because it helps people start to have a healthy view of sexuality before they get married. Because we do have this issue with those who aren't engaging sexually because they never talked about it. They had one sex talk right before they were married. Then they get married, and there's challenges sometimes with how their sex life goes, and no one ever told them that. There was no open conversation about it. And so then here they are. I can't tell you, this is so true. We've got all these young marrieds throughout our congregation, because they call me, and no one had any talks with them beforehand, or they had a sex talk, and the sex talk was with a couple who was doing their premarital counseling who were really, really, really uncomfortable. So the specifics, maybe they read a book and that's it. So if people want to prepare to have one day a great sexual life, or maybe they just want to have a great healthy sexuality, even if they don't ever marry, then obviously the first thing I'll say is figure out how to create an atmosphere within our ministries of talking openly and honestly about sexuality. And if someone has any kind of problematic sexuality in their background, even if they're not doing it now, let's say their pornography use is in their past and it's not now, they might have some things they have to work through about their beliefs about sexuality. If they have any kind of a background with any sexual abuse or molestation, people will think, well, I'll work on that when I get married. Well, actually, it might be beneficial to work through that now. So whether it's aiming for a healthy view of sexuality or whether it's working through problems, people can do that work now. They don't have to wait until they're actually engaging with someone in a marriage relationship. And then, when it comes to making good choices while they're dating and married, talking openly and honestly about that is vital. People often don't even have conversations about what they do and don't want to do while they're dating. So I call those the boundary conversations. You should probably have an honest conversation about how, hey, when you put your hand on my thigh, it kind of gets my juices stirring, and then I struggle later with thoughts. So how about, so figuring out how to have those conversations, even in dating and engaged relationships, is also pretty important. So again, all of the openness piece is vital.
Awesome. Besides your book, which is amazing, do you have any other book recommendations that you would encourage people to read?
Yeah, I love Real Sex by that's the title, and I think it's Winner is the last name. I should know this because I quote her in my book. And then there is a number of books that I would recommend. Anything by Douglas Rosenau, Rosenau. There's one for singles that he wrote, and the name is escaping me. And then, I have a few. They're all mentioned in my book.
Okay, I'll put them in the YouTube description.
Put them in the after. And then also on my website, The Art of Intimate Marriage, is some podcasts specific to singles on redeemed sexuality. So they're long podcasts there's like 10 of them, about every chapter of the book. So there's also some listening that people can do. And then there's a book called Earthen Vessels that I've been telling everybody to read. And it's by, I want to say Matthew Anderson. So I'm hoping I'm getting the name right. Earthen Vessels. And it's a book about the body. I mean, it's got a whole chapter on tattoos, but on what is the biblical approach to the body, which I highly recommend. So I'd say those would be some good places to start.
Well, I want to thank you I know you're very busy, so I want to thank you for taking the time to have this discussion. I mean, my desire is to set up the next generation for success. And for me, my contribution to that is having mental health conversations. And
Mm.
I do desire to see not just church culture change, but also communities changing as well when it comes to these topics. I will definitely put in the books that you mentioned. I'll put in the Amazon links in the YouTube description. I'll have your book down there as well, along with your website.
And there's also a YouTube video called God, Women, and Sexuality. They can watch that. There's a little bit there. Free to
Cool.
watch.
I
Yeah.
will definitely put that in the YouTube description as well.
Yep.
I'm sure people are going to have 1,000 questions coming your way.
Sure. They can send them to me.
Where is the best place for them to contact you?
So they can go on my website, The Art of Intimate Marriage. They can do questions there, but they can also just send them to me on my email, and it's very easy. It's my name with no dots or dashes, jenniferkonzen@yahoo.com. So
Awesome.
Konzen. So Jennifer, Konzen @yahoo.com.